in. Okay, so greetings, District 2 community. My name is Megan Mitchell, and I am your moderator for tonight's panel discussion with Supervisor Stefanie and San Francisco's District Attorney HereSay Boudin. A little about me. First and foremost, I am a native San Franciscan. I'm also a journalist representing HereSay Media. HereSay Media is run by a team of fellow San Franciscans who believe in the power of our city. We think that San Francisco, despite all of its booms, busts, contradictions, and confusions, is a city that can and should be a shining example of urban inclusion. That's why we're getting to the core of the story's most important stories and unearthing the meaning behind the headlines. We hope to empower you with the information you need to hold yourself, your neighbors, and your city accountable through our reporting. Now, before I introduce tonight's speakers, I wanted to start by setting the intention for this space. These type of conversations are hard, but necessary. And with that, I just want to quickly bring back the discussion norms that were put together by the Office of Racial Equity, and I want to thank them for doing that. So just take a moment to look. And all right, now let's get to it. Supervisor Stefanie and District Attorney, if you could take over by introducing yourselves. Let's start with you, Supervisor.
Thank you, Megan. Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us tonight. As you know, I'm Supervisor Stefanie, and I want to thank you, Megan, for being here tonight and moderating. I really appreciate it. Thank you also to HereSay and the Office of Racial Equity for providing us with those discussion norms. As many of you know, I have been hosting public safety town halls over the past year with our station captains, with the chief of our police department, Chief Scott, last month, and tonight with District Attorney HereSay Boudin, in an effort to not only hear from you, but to provide you with an honest and open discussion of the public safety challenges facing our city. So thank you, District Attorney, for joining us tonight for this important discussion. Since we've been sheltering in place and contending with COVID-19, we have seen a huge spike in residential burglaries. We've witnessed an increase in gang and gun-related crimes, and we've heard about many other disturbing incidents that are truly driving families and businesses out of San Francisco. I firmly believe that one of the primary responsibilities of local government is to provide residents with safety and peace of mind. I've said it time and time again, and clearly that is not happening. People deserve to feel safe on every block of the city. And as one of 11 supervisors, I alone cannot enact all the policies that I would like to see, but here's where I would start. Taking burglaries and gun cases seriously, especially repeat offenders, bringing more lawsuits against known drug dealers like those the city attorney announced last year, ensuring the availability of recovery services and stable housing for individuals suffering from addiction, and expanding conservatorship and access to mental health beds. Now, Megan said in the beginning that these are hard but necessary conversations, because we can be compassionate without tolerating behavior that is hurting the city. You can want to feel safe in your home and want to feel safe while walking down the street, and also want a criminal justice system that is in fact just, with rehabilitative programs that get to root causes, one that values the promise of second chances, and one that holds people accountable for their actions. We have a lot of questions that have come in, and I want to let everybody know that if there are specific outstanding questions for me after this event, my office will reach out directly, and you can always call the office or email us at stephaniestaff@sfgov.org. So I want to make sure we have time to get to the questions. And with that, District Boudin, would you please open and introduce yourself?
Sure. Well, thank you, Supervisor Stefanie. I want to echo your thanks to Megan and to HereSay and to all the others who helped make tonight possible. There's really no more important part of my job than to hear from and engage with our constituents. There's a tremendous amount of work that happens day in, day out in my office and in any part of government. And sadly, most of it's not that transparent or that well understood. And we're doing our best to change that. And so I attend every single town hall and community invited to that I possibly can. We host our own monthly town halls where we spend the entire time taking questions from constituents. We have a weekly Facebook Live event. We do every Wednesday at lunch. Last night, I gave a State of Justice speech where I outlined some of the challenges and opportunities that my office is facing. I encourage folks to check that out. It's on Facebook and YouTube. And really, these are issues we're going to talk about tonight that cannot possibly be fully addressed or unpacked in just 1 hour. So I hope we'll get the chance to continue talking about some of the things we're doing in the face of really unprecedented challenges. You know, I took office barely a year ago, and I never could have even conceived of the challenges that my office has faced since then. Converting almost all of our work to remote and electronic case files, figuring out how to move the more than 4,300 criminal cases we filed since I took office towards just outcomes, even as courts are closed, figuring out ways to respond to quickly changing crime trends as most of us have moved indoors, and so have many of the people committing crimes in our neighborhoods, and trying to figure out ways to work more collaboratively with the police to increase clearance rates, increase accountability, and decrease recidivism, which we know has plagued the criminal justice system in every part of this country, no matter who is in charge of local policies and politics. Some of these challenges I set out to address on day one, but I never expected that we'd solve them in my first year in office. I know we've got a lot of work to do, and I know we can't do it alone. So I look forward to collaborating with Supervisor Stefanie and the other members of the board to make sure my office has the resources necessary to at least tread water with the caseloads we inherited, and to increase and expand our victim services. It's something that I've asked for in every single budget request since I took office, and I continue to be committed to demanding that the Board of Supervisors and the mayor and all of City Hall put their money where their mouth is when it comes to victim services. I'm really optimistic that in 2021, the city will be willing to fund and to expand the work that we do, often in partnership with community-based organizations, when it comes to uplifting and supporting and healing victims who've been harmed by crime. But with that, let's get into the questions. I know there's a lot of them, and I want to make sure we have time for as many as possible. Thank you.
Thank you. So as mentioned earlier, tonight's discussion is being recorded, and if you are looking for this recording, you can receive it at a later date by the supervisor's office. Those wanting to ask questions, feel free to do so in the Q&A. If your question was not answered, the supervisor's office will take note of it and respond to you as soon as they can. There's a lot of people on this call, so we're going to try to get to everyone's questions as quickly as possible. Let's just go into it. I'm going to start with a question from Stacy from Seacliff, and this is for you, Supervisor Stefanie. It's regarding quality of life issues. Homeless, car break-in, porch delivery thefts, vandalism, and graffiti seem like they are drastically worsening in our area and surrounding. What are you going to do about it?
Well, thank you, Stacy, for that question. Yes, I agree. It's a huge problem. In Heather Knight's column this week, profiled an amazing cafe owner whose business is collapsing because he's been victimized with vandalism and an attempt to break-ins several times to his business. And all he has received from the city is a tax bill. These kinds of stories are too frequent, and the city needs to step up and provide support. That's why I introduced the largest small business fee waiver package in city history. I think it's really important to support the small businesses during this time, obviously, but also the ones that are being victimized over and over again with vandalism and break-ins. Also, with regard to our neighborhoods, I've been meeting with Captain Yep and groups of affected neighbors to make sure that those directly impacted by the recent uptick in hot prowl burglaries and gun violence in District 2 know that we hear them, and they hear from the SF Police Department about what approaches are being taken and what the challenges are. So we've been meeting with individual neighborhood groups. I also want to say something too, because a lot has been said about crime in this last year, that crime is down. So you would think the quality of life issues, they aren't really there, right? Crime is down. And it's true that according to police data, crime is down overall 24%, but you really have to look at that number and understand what that is. Crime is not down per capita. Prior to this pandemic, San Francisco had a daytime population of over 1.1 million, and between the loss of commuters and tourists, the daytime population is about 28% lower than what it was last year. We know that larceny theft, we know that auto burglaries are down. Yes, that is true. But we also know that tourists are no longer in San Francisco as they once were because of the pandemic. And we also know that many stores are boarded up and not open or have closed permanently. So that would make sense. So overall, crime, in my opinion, isn't really down. The population is down. And more alarmingly, and this is what, when people hear crime is down and they say, well, that's not what I'm seeing, that's not what I'm feeling. Serious crimes are actually up despite the population being down. We know citywide that homicides are up 17%, burglary is up 49%, auto theft up 35%, arson is up 44%, shootings, which I was actually very surprised to learn, which are not even included in the aggregate crime rate, are up 63%. And in Northern District, which is most of District 2, burglary is actually up higher than the citywide average, is 71%. And in District 2 specifically, it's even higher than that, it's at 82%. So crime per capita is not down. So our residents who remain in the city are just as likely, if not more likely, to experience one of these violent crimes. And I think we owe it to them to be actually very honest about what the crime trends are. Also, there are environmental steps that I can take as supervisor to make it more difficult to commit crimes in our community. We've done things like increased lighting around Lafayette Park. We've installed gates at the Palace of Fine Arts that have actually worked out pretty well. We've been meeting with an individual about security cameras throughout San Francisco and using them also in our neighborhoods. Now, these of course are not security cameras that the police department can monitor live, but they also serve as a deterrent to crime and can be used and help prosecute cases later on. But that's the key, really. I think, the individuals in the organized rings breaking into homes, which we heard from Chief Scott at last month's town hall, really need to be held accountable when we're talking about quality of life issues. So that would be my answer to that question. So thank you, Stacey, for that.
Okay, so some of these questions are going to be for both of you. Some are, obviously for one or the other. I do feel like this is a question that probably should get some sort of response from you, District Attorney. Is there anything you'd like to say to this?
Absolutely. Thank you for including me, Megan. I want to respond to a couple points. I think the question raises a lot of really good issues, and it's not just a single question, right? So when we talk about people who are unhoused, for example, that has overlap with our conversations about crime and public safety, but it's also a really different conversation in a couple ways. So first of all, being unhoused, being poor is not a crime. And I can't prosecute people for being unhoused or for being poor. The other thing to remember is that the city has a lot of different agencies that are tasked with dealing with different kinds of issues. The mayor has a Department of Homelessness that has a budget of around $300 million. The city has a Department of Public Health with a budget of around $2 billion. And my agency has a budget of around $70 million. We're not responsible for or in charge of, nor do we have the capacity to deal with the city's housing crisis. What we deal with primarily is cases where police make arrests and present us an investigation. And in the majority of those cases, we file criminal charges or take other action to hold someone accountable for the crime that we believe they committed. When we talk about crime data, though, it's really important, as Supervisor Stefanie said, to be honest and to look at the whole picture and not simply cherry pick one category or another because it suits a prefabricated political narrative. And, these things happen in tandem with each other. When we see some crime rates go up, we often see others go down and vice versa. That's exactly what we saw in 2020. We saw larceny thefts, including auto burglaries, drop by a historic 40%. Tens of thousands fewer reported crimes in that category in 2020 than in 2019. But we know that there are people who earn their living by preying off of others, by committing these kinds of crimes. And with fewer opportunities to break into cars throughout 2020 and make money that way, the people who are committing crime day after day have moved indoors. They've started breaking into businesses that are boarded up. They've started breaking into garages. and more. The police are working as hard as they can to solve these crimes. I believe that so far in 2021, burglaries have a clearance rate of around 10%, meaning 90% of the reported burglaries to the police do not actually result in a case my office can prosecute. And the other 10%, the 10% or so that the police do present us, we file criminal charges in the vast majority of those cases, so somewhere in the neighborhood of 70% of the time, depending on the district and the particulars of the case. So, we're doing what we can, but I think when we talk about crime, we should remember to look at it holistically and not simply cherry pick the categories that have gone up. It's certainly not the case that violent crime is up across the board. And we should be really careful about how we talk about that. So we're not engaging in fear mongering, but instead making policy based on actual data. There's lots of ways you can manipulate San Francisco's population in terms of who's here during the day, who lives here. But the reality is reported rapes in 2020 were down 50%. Reported robberies were down by 23%. Reported assaults were down by 15%. Those are the three very, very important categories of violent crime, all of which my office prosecutes in the majority of cases where police bring us. And I am tremendously heartened to see those categories falling precipitously. Other categories like homicide are up in 2020 compared to 2019. And we need to remember that, and we should look at why it's happening, and we should be able to compare to other jurisdictions. Is the homicide rate in San Francisco up because of some policy of mine or some decision that Chief Scott made or something the Board of Supervisors did or didn't do? Well, there's a really easy way to answer that question. Let's look at other cities with different elected officials and different policies. Homicide rates are up in almost every major city in the country in 2020 compared to 2019. In fact, in 2019, San Francisco's homicide rate was the lowest it's been in 56 years. The lowest it's been in 56 years. So the homicide rate in 2020 was higher than 2019, but it was in keeping with what we saw in 2018, 2017, 2016. And look, let's be clear, even one homicide is one too many. And we should absolutely do whatever we can to bring those numbers down and continue to hit historic lows every year if we at all can, if it's possible to do so. But let's look across the bay at Oakland and San Jose, two cities with very different politics, very different district attorneys and police chiefs, and both of those cities saw homicide rates increase in 2020 far more than ours did in San Francisco. So as much as we want to focus on the negative, let's remember the positive, and let's ensure that the policies we develop are based on a holistic and accurate understanding of crime trends, not just in San Francisco, but regionally and across the country.
Thank you. You may have to reiterate some of the points you made before, but I do want to make sure I get this District 2 residents question out. This is from Lauren in Cow Hollow, and this one will go for both of you. So we've been talking about spikes in violent crimes. Lauren says there's been one in Cow Hollow at all hours of the day and night, specifically gunshots and carjackings. She wants to know what specifically you're doing to prevent this and hold people committing those crimes responsible so that these crimes stop once and for all. And Supervisor, I'll start with you.
Great, thank you, Megan. I think many people know that gun violence is one of the issues I care most passionately about. I've done a lot of volunteer work for the past 2 decades on gun violence prevention throughout really my entire career, and is taking place in San Francisco at an unacceptable rate. I firmly believe that everyone should be able to live freely without the fear of gun violence. The data just show from 2020 a 63% increase in shooting incidents recorded by police. And there's more shooting incidents, I could name them all, that have happened in District 2 that have been very alarming to my constituents. There are 515 total shooting incidents from last year. And the ShotSpotter data, our citywide system to track gunshots that are heard, shows an even larger increase in activations. And so far this year, we've had 22 shootings, and as opposed to 9 last year. We have to remember that crimes committed with guns, even if the gun is not shot, are absolutely terrifying and psychological and emotional for those survivors. I've worked with them for years. It's not something that we can tolerate. I also want to say too, when we were talking about victims of crime, that in quarter two of 2020, 60% of aggregated assault victims were Asian, Latinx, or Black. 57% of battery cases were people of color. 73% of robbery victims were people of color. Black San Franciscans are 5% of the city population, but comprise 30% of sexual assault victims. And 66% of domestic violence victims were Asian, Latinx, or Black. And more than half of homicide victims are people of color. So when I saw what was happening with regard to gun violence last year, again, absolutely shocked with what I was seeing in our city. I've been here 21 years and I've been in government here since 2007. I called for our budget and legislative analysts to conduct a study on shooting incidents in San Francisco and to report on the 5-year trends in incidents, arrests, charges, and final dispensation of those cases. We have to understand how many incidents are left unaddressed in order to fix the system. I do plan on holding a hearing once we receive that final report. And also, there's no single way to win the fight against gun violence. There are so many things we can do at the national, the state, and the local level. But we really have no chance of really getting to the core of gun violence unless we actually charge the crimes. And another option that I believe is important, what I've heard, gun enhancements. And I know the district attorney's opinion on this. I've read the policy and I understand that the increase that comes with a gun enhancement is not something that he agrees with. But at the same time, we have to address the fact that if a gun is used in a crime, charging a misdemeanor possession of a gun is not going to get to the heart of what's going on. There's no reason why interventions can't be made to make sure that that person no longer commits gun violence. But at the same time, we have to take it seriously. We absolutely have to take every crime committed with a gun seriously in San Francisco. So that is it for me on that answer. And like I said, very passionate about gun violence, and I'm working on a few things that I will be introducing in the next coming months with regard to gun violence prevention, and I'll be excited to let you all know about that as well.
Thank you so much, Supervisor. District Attorney?
Sure, thanks, Megan. Well, look, not only do we charge gun cases, but we secure convictions in them. And it's something that my staff do every day. It's not something that necessarily gets covered in the headlines. I know the newspapers prefer to focus on things that don't go as planned or that don't go right. There's more scandal there, there's more sensation, but the reality is all day, every day, I've got teams of lawyers prosecuting these cases and doing it effectively and successfully. Let me give you a couple concrete examples. Just today, literally today at 1:30 p.m., we received a verdict in a juvenile murder trial with a gun. Conviction on all counts. That happened today. 2 months ago now, I personally took a very old stabbing case, a murder, had been languishing for years without so much as a preliminary hearing. And I personally took that case on to move it forward closer to trial. I presented the evidence myself to a grand jury, and I secured an indictment. That's not something that any of the previous 3 district attorneys themselves did while in office. And it's not something that the entire district attorney's office did in the entire year of 2019. In other words, they didn't secure a single grand jury indictment in the district attorney's office in all of 2019. And I personally secured one in a murder case that was years old and had not even had a preliminary hearing. I'm rolling up my sleeves and I'm fighting like heck to make sure we don't have a backlog of serious and violent cases. The other thing to remember is that policies are important, and when you have a confusion or misunderstanding of a policy, please, everyone, reach out and ask us. I was really disappointed and surprised to hear Supervisor Stefanie misstate or misunderstand one of our office policies. We absolutely do charge gun enhancements. Personal use of a firearm can add 10 years or more to a robbery, for example, and we charge those enhancements regularly. Conduct enhancements like use of firearms are critically important tools to hold people accountable and to make sure that we are treating different offenders differently based on the risk their crimes pose to the public. We do it every day. Come watch what's going on at the Hall of Justice, and you'll see the more than 5,000 criminal cases I inherited, the more than 4,300 new criminal cases my office has filed, and adult cases are all moving forward slowly but surely towards just resolutions. I sure as heck wish we hadn't been shut down by the COVID pandemic. It's made it a lot harder for my teams to move cases forward. but we're doing everything we can, and we're doing it every day.
I just would like to follow up with you on that offline when we're done, to really go over your gun enhancement policy, because I actually read it and I think I did understand it. And with regard to charging gun enhancements, it's one thing to charge, but what is the final dispensation of the case? Did that gun enhancement factor into a plea? Was that gun enhancement dismissed? I would love to go over those cases, so I think this is something you and I can work on together because it's really important to me.
Yeah, absolutely. And just again for context, the average life of a felony case when I took office was over a year. In other words, from the date of arrest to the date of disposition, when I took office in 2019, the average was over a year. And of course, with courts being closed because of COVID, that average life of a case has extended considerably. We just don't have the courtrooms to move these cases or to do trials. What that means is that the vast majority of cases that I filed, the 4,300 cases or so filed under my administration, haven't reached a resolution yet. We don't actually know the answer to that question because we don't have the bandwidth or the resources. Now, speaking of resources, Supervisor Stefanie, I would love it if you could commit to working with me in my office to expand our victim services. That's something I'll be requesting in my upcoming budget. It's something that I know people suffering from crime, especially those people in the 90%, for example, of residential burglaries where police don't make an arrest. People still need help. They still need services. And my victim services team would love to be able to provide that support. Can you commit to helping my office be fully funded for victim services?
I would actually like to commit to making sure that we're not expanding the number of victims in San Francisco. So yes, I will definitely work with you when it comes to helping victims, but I really think that what we should be focused on is figuring out how we can reduce the victim count in San Francisco. But yes, I'm always, always, always happy to help with victim services.
Great. I look forward to working with you on that in the upcoming budget.
All right. So next question. And this is from Larry from Pacific Heights. This one is for you, Mr. District Attorney. And the question reads, how, if at all, have your policies changed on account of the well-publicized recent killings of 2 women pedestrians by a parolee with outstanding warrants? How does this incident personally affect you?
I'm not aware of any outstanding warrants in that case, but the incident is a tragic one, and it's one that highlights a lot of system problems that many of which predate me. I met personally with the family of Hanako Abe and Elizabeth Platt, and those meetings were among the most difficult things I've had to do. I think about those 2 women every day, and I think about what my office could have done differently and what our law enforcement partners could have done differently that might have prevented that tragedy. Of course, we're dealing with hundreds of decisions every single day, and we don't have a crystal ball. We don't know which person on our desk is going to end up being involved in a tragedy like the one on New Year's Eve. We don't know which person on our desk is going to end up themselves being a victim of a violent crime. And the lawyers in my intake team have been in this office collectively over 100 years. Let me say that again. The lawyers in my intake team have been in the office collectively over 100 years. The lawyers who made decisions in the Troy McAllister case, for example. The lawyers who made decisions in every single general felony or misdemeanor case that police present to us have a tremendous amount of wisdom, experience, and dedication to public safety. And when they make decisions based on police investigations, they do it based on the facts and the law. They choose to file cases we can prove every day. They choose not to file cases where the investigation or the proof is insufficient every day. And they choose to defer to other law enforcement agencies or jurisdictions that may have more leverage than we do every day. That's the nature of our job. That's the bread and butter of what prosecutors do day in, day out. And the vast majority of those decisions will never be scrutinized. They never will be scrutinized. It's only the outliers. It's only the tragedies that draw tremendous attention. And so we have to remember that not all tragedies lead to good public policy. Now, when it comes to the specific question and the specific things that we're doing differently, I immediately convened a meeting with the chief of police, the head of parole, the head of adult probation, the sheriff, and a representative from the mayor's office so that we could all get on the same page about communication and why things happened the way they did in that particular case. That conversation was a productive one. I'm not going to share all of the details from it now because it is an ongoing conversation. But one concrete step that I will share with you is one of my chiefs in the criminal division, who's been in the office more than 20 years, agreed as a follow-up from that meeting to draft a memorandum of understanding to clearly lay out the roles, responsibilities, and communication expectations of every single agency that deals with these cases on a daily basis. We know that there was a lot of information that wasn't adequately communicated or acted on between our agencies, and we want to make sure that never happens again.
Thank you so much for that. All right, and this next question is going to be for you both. We'll start with you, Supervisor. Question from Charles and Russian Hill is, what are you going to do to make SF safer for seniors?
Well, thank you, Charles, for that question. Making San Francisco safe for seniors is extremely important to me. My dad is 76, going through Lewy body dementia and Merced, and the struggles he has gone through and that I've seen my family go through have been so difficult. And I know that so many people are also struggling with the same type of things. But with regard to seniors, you know, a lot of what we've done is around pedestrian safety. We had 29 pedestrians were struck and killed in San Francisco last year. Actually, we had one in District 2, someone near Cathedral Hill at Geary and Goff was killed while walking through a crosswalk by a reckless driver who was actually videotaping it, recording live on Instagram, and posting to social media. We have advocated for safer streets in that area and red light cameras, and also various other ways to keep Geary and Goff and other intersections and high entry corridors in San Francisco much safer than they are now. But I also know we're not talking just about pedestrian safety. We're also talking about making a city that's safe for our seniors, whether or not they're walking through their neighborhood day or night. It's something, you know, that's a reality. You know, they should be able to walk through the neighborhoods without fear of things happening. Everybody should. And just yesterday, and I say this because it's something that happened, and it's something that is very upsetting, that there was a older gentleman in his 80s that was actually accosted violently and shoved to the ground by someone in broad daylight in D2 in the Anza Vista area, and he's in critical condition right now. And it's just, for me, it just makes me sad. You can't go out for a walk, or this person now is, you know, suffering and might not make it. I think, you know, a lot of the things we've been talking about here on how to make San Francisco more safe in general, of course, apply to seniors as well. There are other things that we can do to help seniors secure their homes. We've talked to other people about how they can secure their garages, since that seems to be where people are breaking into and stealing bikes and other things. We can talk about security cameras. Like I said, public safety is my top priority. And although SF Safe is really overloaded right now because of COVID, my office is actually helping individual cases, and will work with people and seniors who need to fortify their homes in a way based on what's going on.
Yeah, I have 4 parents. All of them are over 75. So keeping our elders safe is really, really important to me, and making sure this city is a safe, friendly place for elders and for families with kids and for everybody who comes here. It's a critical issue. It's actually my entire job is to make sure San Francisco is safer. I'm well aware of the really tragic case that Supervisor Stefanie just mentioned. Really horrible robbery turned into potentially a murder. And I very much hope the police arrest the man that did it so that we can hold him accountable. I was on the phone with Chief Scott and many other members of his command staff this morning talking about that case. And I very much hope that they arrest him so we can bring him to justice. It is important to remember, though, as tragic and as absolutely outrageous as that incident is, contrary to some of the statements that you've heard tonight, actually robberies, I want to reiterate, are down 23% in 2020. And so far to date, in 2021, compared to last year, this same time period, robberies are down 28%. Now, these aren't my statistics. So I want to share with you a link to the San Francisco Police Department's crime dashboard. You can check it out for yourself. The kind of case Supervisor Stefanie just referred to is absolutely 100% my priority, my office's priority. If the police solve it, we will prosecute it. We will hold the man who committed the crime accountable. We will support the victim or the victim's next of kin in every single case, however we can. And I hope, again, that the Board of Supervisors will work with us to expand our ability to support those victims. And also to fully staff our homicide unit, which has been a real struggle to keep fully staffed amidst the budget pressure we've had from the city and from the board. But again, that kind of crime is actually on the decline. It's a historic drop in that kind of robbery. 27% down year to date, 23% down in 2020 compared to 2019. Back to the heart of the question about elders and what we're doing. We have lawyers in my office who specialize in elder abuse cases. And they're not just violent cases, they're also financial abuse. We know that people in their golden years are more vulnerable, not just to violent crime, but also to people who seemingly befriend them only to deprive them of their life savings. This is something we see particularly with members of the immigrant community, with limited English speakers, and we've got dedicated district attorney investigators and assistant district attorney lawyers who focus full-time on those cases. As in every area of public safety, and this is something I know Supervisor Stefanie and I agree on 100%, we are all better off if we can prevent crime. It's not enough to simply prosecute crimes that are committed, although of course we do that. We need to prevent, detect, and hold accountable, all three of those things.
I just want to say I appreciate your remarks about the case that happened yesterday. That's very sad. And I do want to follow up with you again after this about robberies, because I too have been on the phone with command staff about the case and discussing their crime data. And with robberies, although slightly down, what disturbs me about that number, and I agree, yes, they're down, is that when you look at the cases, they're actually more violent. And that is from the police. That is not me making it up. And it is something that we can talk about. It's great that they're down, but at the same time, the brazenness of some of this that I've seen in my district. There was a field crew robbed broad daylight in the marina, a gun to their head.
I think we lost you, Supervisor. I think we lost you.
Supervisor, if you want to take your camera off for a second, and then just turn it back on.
Well, I'll just weigh in while the supervisor gets her connection sorted out. Absolutely, those sorts of anecdotal incidents are tremendously distressing, and those are the cases we're prosecuting when the police solve them. That's what we do, and we're working closely with the police department to improve clearance rates, to improve detection and prevention, and to make sure that when there are arrests, we get the kind of evidence we need to successfully prosecute those cases.
And I understand that I was not there for a while, or for a minute. Is that correct?
We lost you at gun to her head.
Oh, that's a great place to lose me. So no, I'm just saying, and what I want to do is follow up with you on robberies, because the ones that we've seen lately in the marina have been more violent than, that we've seen before, confirmed by the police. And so I think that's something that I would love to follow up with you on.
Absolutely, yeah, let's talk about it. And like I said, if there's a robbery with a gun, that adds usually 10 years. If it's a fake gun or some other deadly weapon, that usually adds 1 year to the exposure. If it's a robbery causing great bodily injury, again, that adds exposure, and we charge those allegations. They're called conduct enhancements. We charge those regularly when there's evidence to support them.
All right, on to the next question. Thank you both for that. And this is another one that's going to be for both of you. We'll start with you, Mr. Boudin. So this one's from Cynthia from Lower Pacific Heights. My Walgreens is constantly being robbed. My understanding is that the DA will not prosecute small crimes, but if there are no consequences, why and how will it end? I feel like a fool standing in line waiting to pay. Often when I see someone walk out with a box of stuff they didn't pay for, this really happens.
Thank you for the question, and I really appreciate the opportunity to address a lot of the misinformation that's really common and sadly has sort of made its way out into the public that we hear in that question. I want to be really clear about a couple things. My office prosecutes commercial burglaries. We prosecute robberies. We even prosecute petty thefts or shoplifting in the rare instances where we actually get a case presented to us. But when it comes to the kind of conduct you're describing, much of which would be categorized as a petty theft or a larceny theft, police clearance rates are in the neighborhood of 3%. Well, what that means is 97% of the time, when someone reports a crime like the one you described, no arrest is made. So we can't prosecute it. But we do prosecute petty thefts when they're presented to us. We prosecute them in our criminal court in department number 17. It's on the second floor of the Hall of Justice. If you want to check it out, you're welcome to attend. It's open to the public. The problem is most of these kinds of crimes are not solved. So I think your question is right on. What's the deterrent if 97% of the time you're not even going to get arrested? Now, there's other issues that I think may be part of the conversation. State law, for example, recently changed to allow anybody accused of a petty theft to participate in a diversion program. In other words, they can earn a dismissal of the charges regardless of what my office wants. That's a state law. So sometimes police, I think, are really demoralized by the large number of calls they get, by the difficulty they may have in apprehending people, especially when everybody's wearing masks. So it can be very difficult to identify a particular suspect. And also, I think a lot of police, what I hear from the officers I communicate with, is that a lot of police are frustrated that there aren't more severe sanctions for people who engage in this kind of conduct. Now, again, I don't control the state laws. I don't get to dictate whether a particular dollar denomination is a misdemeanor or a felony, or whether a particular charge is eligible for diversion. We're working with the laws as well as we can. We're working with the cases the police present to us to hold people accountable in ways that hopefully change their behavior and restore the victims to how they were before the crime was committed. But we cannot prosecute a case if nobody reports it or if the police aren't able to successfully investigate it. Those are critical first steps.
With regard to the Walgreens issue, we've all seen the videos, and I talk to my Maggie at Walgreens all the time on Lombard and Divisadero, and it's not just the taking of stuff; it's how the people feel inside the store when people are there. It's not, yes, property crime, but that violation of going in there and just taking stuff, not knowing what could happen. It's really traumatizing to the people who work there. And with regard to police clearance rates, Chief Scott addressed this last month when we had our town hall, and he shared some details about what San Francisco Police Department is, what they're doing on this. He explained that they're not adequately staffed at the moment, and so while they are sometimes able to work with the store management to send in officers or station on-duty officers on streets where this is a persistent issue, they just don't have the capacity to make that the norm at all of our neighborhood Walgreens. And what else he said that was very interesting is that a lot of these cases, this activity is part of larger organized crime. And they actually, it's not a one-off. They know who these people are. And the statewide retail theft task force, which was funded by the governor's office, includes the police department, our police department, the California Highway Patrol, and others. They've had some success in making big arrests of individuals involved in what's called fencing operations, which are reselling these stolen products. Another part of the problem is that the people who steal in bulk actually are attempting to resell online to retailers like Amazon. And Amazon doesn't regulate or verify whether or not the products for sale are legitimate or stolen. A few months ago, a large Amazon warehouse was raided and $8 million worth of stolen merchandise was found inside. So a lot of the time, this is a very profitable enterprise with no accountability, and this cycle continues. So I am strongly supportive of refunding the retail theft task force at the state level, because funding will run out at the end of this fiscal year, and that this is something that can't continue to happen. We know our seniors depend on Walgreens to get their medications at the pharmacies. We have to do something about it. And we have to figure out how to build cases and actually get to the people that are benefiting most from this, and that is organized crime. So there's a lot we can do, a lot more we can be doing, I believe, but there has to be consequences for going into a Walgreens, dumping the shelves into a bag and walking out. So hopefully we'll be able to continue to work with the district attorney and the police department to come to better outcomes.
Yeah, let me just follow up, Supervisor Stefanie. You made a really important point there, and I appreciate you raising it. The statewide retail theft task force, really critical. I share your commitment to getting it funded again so we can continue it. It's been an area where our office, in partnership with other agencies, have been able to do really, really important work in this space. As the supervisor said, police can't be everywhere at once. They don't have the personnel, they don't have the budget. And it's just not possible for them to be stationed in every Walgreens. But we can do work on the back end. And I'm really proud that our district attorney investigators this year participated in retail theft operations that reclaimed over $11 million in stolen goods before they got fenced, as Supervisor Stefanie said, on Amazon or often shipped overseas. The other thing that is important to note is, again, as Supervisor Stefanie said, the San Francisco Police Department simply does not have the staffing or the resources to be stationed in every single Walgreens. It's why petty theft and larceny clearance rates are so low. I put the link to the SFPD dashboard in the chat so people can check out some of the challenges that I know we're working with Chief Scott, and Supervisor Stefanie and I are both committed to helping the police department bring those clearance rates up. In the meantime, we launched a community liaison program to assign assistant district attorneys and victim advocates and district attorney investigators to every single district in the city, including District 2. I know some of the team from my office that are the District 2 liaisons are here watching tonight. I want to thank them for volunteering. We don't have a budget or staffing levels to make this a formal part of people's jobs. My budget and my staff is back to effectively where we were in 2015. So we're really struggling to do more with less. But one of the community liaisons took it on himself. He's a misdemeanor attorney, and he took it on himself to start working with our investigators to actually write warrants to arrest people that, as Supervisor Stefanie said, are repeat offenders, folks we've identified, but the police simply don't have the resources to arrest or to present us with the cases. So we're writing our own arrest warrants, even in misdemeanor cases where the dollar value amount is well under $950. It'd be great if SFPD had the resources to deal with that. But in the meantime, we're stepping up however we can, working collaboratively with them and writing our own arrest warrants.
Thank you so much for that, Mr. Boudin. Okay, so the next question is coming from Ellen from Pacific Heights, and this one is for you, Mr. Boudin. How is the DA's office currently thinking about addressing crime that is committed by people who are homeless and are suffering from mental health or addiction issues?
Yeah, thank you for that question. It's such an important part of our broader effort to make San Francisco safer. About 75% of people booked into San Francisco County Jail every year are mentally ill, drug addicted, or both. And the county jail before I took office, became the #1 provider of behavioral health services in the city. In other words, there's more mental health care being provided in the jail than in San Francisco General Hospital or anywhere else. It's a problem. It's not humane, it's not cost efficient, and it's not effective at keeping us safe. Essentially, what we're doing is we're leaving people with very serious mental health issues out on the street and waiting for them to commit a crime that's serious enough that we can hold them in custody for a long time. It is not a good approach to public safety. Now, I work with supervisors like Supervisor Stefanie every day. We go back and forth. Supervisor Peskin, for example, was emailing me a couple of weeks ago about someone in his neighborhood, in his district, who is severely mentally ill. And my office had filed charges against that individual, but thankfully the police got there in time. No serious crime was committed before the police arrived, and so we only had a misdemeanor charge against the individual. This is one of the ironies of the criminal justice system. When the police do their job at its best, when they arrive quickly and they prevent a worst case scenario, we have less leverage in terms of criminal charges. But we're absolutely committed in every single case that the police bring us to trying to identify the root causes of crime. What is driving the criminal behavior? What is causing people or leading people to think it's okay to use violence or to steal from a store? And we try to hold them accountable in every case in ways that address that root cause, in ways that change their behavior so that we're not having the jail and the prison system serve as a revolving door. And look, this isn't a unique problem to San Francisco or to 2020. For years, prison systems in California and across the country have had recidivism rates. In other words, rates at which people are reincarcerated after their release that are way above 2/3. I believe the Board of Supervisors did a report in 2018 that showed the San Francisco County Jail had a recidivism rate of above 100%. That means in 2018, on average, every single person booked into the county jail would be booked into the county jail more than once. Now, I know there's some individuals who are driving those numbers, but that is absolutely unacceptable. And it speaks to the need for a more diverse array of interventions. It speaks to the need for things like safe injection sites. My chief of staff, former Supervisor David Campos, proposed a safe consumption site for drugs more than 5 years ago. And here we are with people overdosing in isolated alleys and corners of our city, overdoses that could be prevented, lives that could be saved if we simply invested in upfront prevention and public health interventions that save lives and keep all of us safe. So let's make sure that going forward, we have a public health approach to problems that can be solved through treatment on demand, through safe consumption, through harm reduction, and that we're reserving the criminal justice interventions that are expensive and often come too late for people who've been harmed by crime, for those cases where there really is no other way to intervene upstream. Let's intervene upstream. Let's prevent the next crime from being committed. Let's prevent the next victim from being harmed, and let's use our resources more efficiently in the process.
Megan, if I could just add to that, because I definitely agree with District Attorney Boudin that our jails are not the place to house those who are suffering from mental illness, and we need to be doing better as a city, and I think we have been working on that. We do have the behavioral health court, but sadly, to get into behavioral health court, you have to commit a crime. You have to get into the criminal justice system to get help through the behavioral health court. And what we want to do, of course, is prevent people getting into the criminal justice system. And it brings up something for me that I found very disturbing. We have had someone in the Presidio Mountain Lake Park area, a woman who is definitely suffering from mental illness, and she's in and out of SF General on 5150s over and over again. And we have committed so much time and resources. My office, the neighbors, they've put so much time into trying to get this woman help. I won't even go into what is happening on the playground in front of children, but it's really a sad case. So the last time that I know of, which was maybe a month ago, she was at SF General on a 5150 hold, which is 72 hours when you're a danger to yourself or others. And then there's something called a 5250 hold. 5250 hold is when doctors when doctors state that this person needs continued help, and they can be held for up to 2 weeks. But to do so, of course, you need due process, you need a hearing to decide whether or not that person can be kept against his or her desire in inpatient psychiatric care. So the 5250 hearing for this woman, she was going to get more help. Our doctors at SF General said, this woman needs more help. And if I showed you everything that I've read about what's happened to her and what's happening out there on the playgrounds, I think you would agree. But what happened at that 5250 hearing is that a public defender argued on her behalf that she shouldn't be kept in the hospital for additional help. I mean, I was actually astounded. And then, of course, the hearing officer agreed with the public defender, and she was released against medical advice. After she was released, it happened over and over again. So the 5250 hearing and with the public defender, I actually talked to the police department on this one particular case, and they were astounded as well. So I think if we're going to take mental health seriously, and we're going to try to get people the help they need, so they're not out there committing more acts that, you know what, if they do get better, praying that they do, it will be a hard thing for them to see that they did this. Like I said, I don't want to go into the details, but many of you probably on this call know what I'm talking about. But we have to take that seriously. We have to get them the help they need. We have to look at conservatorship. Our city departments have to follow through on the implementation of conservatorship, and that's just not happening. I've been sitting in public safety meetings as the vice chair of the Public Safety Committee, and we've had 3 times DPH come before that committee to talk about the implementation of Scott Wiener's legislation that would allow more people to be conserved. Not one person has been conserved under that. So we really have to be doing more to get people the help. We need to get more mental health beds, and we have to be serious about making sure that when doctors say that this person needs additional help, that we really take a look at that. And of course, yes, everyone is entitled to due process and should have a hearing at this stage, but we have to really examine what on earth are we doing if we have doctors saying we need additional help for this woman and she's not getting it. And she's back out there again, and she's going to continue to go on the 5150 loop over and over again. One last thing on that is that, because they mentioned addiction, I'm actually having a hearing on February 11th where we are going to actually hear from addicts who have recovered and who are in recovery, who have been in the criminal justice system. They came up with, they're the Recovery Summit Task Force, they came up with recommendations, and we will be hearing from them on how they got clean and sober, what worked for them, what were the interventions that helped them, how do they then help people that are also suffering from addiction. So I think we're going to learn a lot, and I think that sometimes what happens with what I've seen in San Francisco anyway, is that a lot of times the recovery community is not really listened to or is taken as seriously as they should be, I think, because they actually have been through it and they know what it's like to every day try to stay clean and sober and succeed at it and help others do so. So although harm reduction is something that I definitely think is important in San Francisco and definitely something very necessary, we also have to have a plethora of opportunities for people to get clean and sober in this town. And we have to understand exactly what addiction is. And we have to make sure that it is easier to get recovery in San Francisco than it is to buy drugs. So that's what we can be doing around addiction and the mental health issues that we continue to see to plague those that are suffering from them and those who are on our streets.
Yeah, I just want to echo what Supervisor Stefanie said about conservatorships. You know, it is so much better from a public safety standpoint if the city agency is responsible for providing mental health care and for securing conservatorships can do that before a violent crime is committed. We simply don't have the mandate. We don't have the ability in my office to seek conservatorships in the vast majority of these cases. And so we need our partners in the Department of Public Health and the city attorney and other agencies to make sure that, first of all, there's 24/7 treatment on demand so that people who want help can get it. And second of all, that if people refuse help, that the conservatorship law is applied and applied effectively before a violent crime is committed. And that's what we're trying to prevent. And I know there's a bunch of questions in the Q&A that we haven't gotten to. I did see one I wanted to make sure to address. There's a lot of good questions there. When it comes to, actually this relates to something Supervisor Stefanie said at the beginning about the city attorney. When it comes to drug sales, my office prosecutes above 75% of the drug sale cases that the police bring us. It's actually the highest or one of the highest rebooking rates our office has. And it's the single largest category of case that my lawyers handle. Of any felony case, drug sales are the single largest category. Now, I'm not proud of that fact. I don't think it's effective. For all the same reasons that the war on drugs has failed for decades, it's not working in San Francisco today. But we are prosecuting the cases police bring us by the hundreds. And it's simply not making a difference for all the reasons why a low-level, buy-bust approach has not worked anywhere that the war on drugs has been tried. And I would love it if we could work with our law enforcement partners to have higher level interventions and arrests. But the city attorney tried to step into this space and help out with the problems in the Tenderloin in particular. And just to be really clear, Supervisor Stefanie mentioned at the beginning of the hour the injunctions that the city attorney is seeking against known drug dealers. Just to be clear, every single person on that list, by definition, is someone my office has already filed at least one felony case against. There's not a single person on the city attorney's list who wasn't already being prosecuted by my office, who didn't already have a stay-away order from the area they were arrested. That's what we do, and we do it every single day that the police bring us drug sales cases.
I didn't know that we were going to the Q&A, but thank you for for looking into that question and providing an answer. I actually, I think this is such a huge issue. Obviously, drug sales in San Francisco and drug deaths, overdoses in San Francisco are off the hook. I mean, 700 opiate overdoses, 700 people dead. I mean, look at that compared to our COVID deaths. It's absolutely unconscionable. And when, and I really, again, this is another thing I would love to follow up with you on, because the cases that you say that you're filing, that they bring to you, I just really would love to understand, what is the initial filing? Because we know there's possession for sale of drugs, and then there's sale of drugs, which are felonies, my understanding. It's been a while since I was a deputy district attorney, but I do understand the basics. And then there's simple possession, which we know is a misdemeanor. And then there's something called Penal Code 32, which is accessory after the fact, which I understand some of these cases are being pled out to a Penal Code 32. So I think it's one thing to say, we charge all these cases. We charge felonies cases. Okay, you may charge them, but what is happening at plea and dispo? When people are pleading out on cases, or when you're offering a plea, what is happening there? Are they diverted? Have the felonies come down to just a misdemeanor possession? Has a misdemeanor possession come down to Penal Code 32? I would really like to dig into that, actually. If you could even provide that data of all, you just said you made all those arrests, even looking at those one by one.
No, we don't make arrests, Supervisor Stefanie.
Not arrests.
SFPD makes arrests.
I get that. I misspoke. Trust me, I understand that.
Okay, just want to make sure. We got 300 people watching. I want to make sure they understand as well as you do.
I think if they pass fourth grade, they probably understand that. So what I'm saying to you is that all the felonies that you've said you filed with regard to drug sales in this town, what have they pled out on felonies, or did they go down to misdemeanors?
Yeah, so
I just want to follow up with you on that. Understand exactly what's going on.
I'm trying to answer. As I said earlier, the average lifespan of a case from arrest to settlement was about a year before I took office. Because of COVID, it's actually a lot longer. So the vast majority of drug sales cases that we filed since I took office have not yet been settled. That's consistent with the amount of time it takes to resolve felony cases in the Hall of Justice. We've got a serious backlog. I would love your help in getting the resources to clear it. I had to divert lawyers from my charging division to deal with the scandal in the Office of the Chief Medical Examiner. I sent a letter to the Board of Supervisors and the mayor asking for the resources to deal with that. I estimated it was going to cost millions of dollars of staff time to deal with another agency's problem when a forensic technician in the medical examiner's office was arrested in Utah with drugs appeared to have been stolen from the medical examiner. Not my problem, but my office has to deal with it. We didn't get a single dollar of funding or support from the city to do it. So we need help to address these problems. And if we're going to clear the backlog, we certainly need to do it together. But of course, Supervisor Stefanie, I'd be more than happy to provide you or anybody that asks for it with data on how drug sales felony charges typically resolve. I can tell you that since way before I took office, it was true that many of those cases would resolve for Penal Code Section 32 disposition, sometimes misdemeanor, sometimes felony. It was a standard offer for resolving those cases, primarily because of a commitment this city has and a requirement under state law to factor in immigration consequences. It's actually a Penal Code section that took effect since you stopped practicing law, but requires district attorneys by law, state law, to consider immigration consequences, if any, when negotiating a case. And under the previous administration, because of that law, and because of the immigration consequences of a drug sales conviction, often those types of cases initially filed as a drug sale felony or possession for sale felony will be resolved for some other charge that doesn't have such dire consequences in immigration court.
All right. So what I'm getting is that there's obviously going to be a part 2 because there's so many things to cover around this topic, yet we are at time. So I want to thank you both for participating in this very important discussion. Supervisor Stefanie, thank you so much for hosting.
Thank you,
District Attorney, thank you for taking the time to talk with us and clear up some things and explain things, and hopefully you two will work together.
Absolutely. Thank you, Megan. Absolutely. I email the supervisor regularly asking for help with my agency and improving public safety, and it sounds like we've got a commitment from her to help our agency do a better job meeting the needs of San Franciscans. So I'm excited to work with her and the entire board on improving my department's ability to respond to crime. That's what we're here for.
And thank you. And Supervisor, if you would just remind us again about your upcoming meeting on February 11th, how we can tune in to that.
It's February 11th at our Public Safety and Neighborhood Services Committee at 10 a.m. We will send out more information as we have it. We can probably post the report somewhere, the task force recommendations. I will have my aide do that. He can let everybody know where they can find that report. So February 11th at 10 a.m.
And for folks who want to ask me questions, I see 159 in the Q&A for me and the supervisor. February 4th, we've got our monthly town hall. We spend the entire hour just answering questions. So please come. We take them from the chat. So it's not just questions submitted in advance, but also questions that we get live in the moment. And I'd love to hear from you. So please join us on February 4th. We'll take your questions as you got them.
Thank you. And just to remind, the supervisor's office will be also fielding those questions. So if you want to send them to her office, she will respond as well. Again, thank you both and have a wonderful weekend.
Thank you, everybody. Stay safe. Thank you.
Thanks, everybody.